Hello world, so I will be discussing on loops in this particular video. So these are the topic which I'll be covering as part of loop, which I'm going to divide in multiple videos. What are loops? For loop, then while loop, and then loop control statements, which are break keyword and continue keyword, then usage of else keyword in the loop, then pass keyword, and finally the nested loop. So in this particular video, I will be going to discuss on what are loops and for loop. What are loops? So in programming, loops basically executes the piece of code repeatedly. Another term for the word repeatedly is iteratively, based on certain conditions. So till the condition is matching, loop will execute the piece of code again and again. And each repetition of this piece of code is known as iteration. Let's say we are using for loop and some statements are written in for block and that piece of code is executed 10 times. So each time when the piece of code is executing is known as iteration. So it will be known as first iteration, second iteration, third iteration till 10th iteration. Now we have seen in the conditional statements also the condition can either be true or false. So when condition is true, then the body of loop executes, and as soon as the condition becomes false, control comes out of the body of the loop. For loop is also known as for in loop in Python, and it is used for sequential traversal in Python. Now there are different ways in which for loop is used in Python. First one is for loop on sequence. Sequence data types are string, list, tuple, set, and dictionary. For loop can be used on any of these sequences, and this is the syntax. Here is a piece of code that I have written for you. A is a string and a string is of sequential data type. So this is the syntax for iterating variable in sequence. So I is the iterating variable. So iterating variable means the value of I will keep on iterating and it will be different in different iteration. So this is for block which consists of only one statement, which is print I. So I will iterate over this string character by character. So when I'll run this program, it will print P, then in next line Y, then T, and then in next line H, O, and N. It has printed Python and each character in a new line. Similarly, it can be used on list, tuple, set, and dictionary. So let me take an example of dictionary here. Dict is a dictionary which contains key A and value 1 and key B having value 2. So when I'm using iterating variable over this dictionary and printing the value, it will basically print the keys one by one. If I'll run this program, it will print the keys in each of the iteration. So this is about the for loop on sequences. We can directly use the for loop instead of using it on the sequence variable. What I mean is that instead of declaring dict variable in separate line, I can directly write down here. If I'll run this program, it will still print A and B. Similarly, I can write, let's say, string also. So it is still working. I can directly write, let's say, some tuple. So it is still working. This is the direct usage of for loop. Then the next one is iterating using range, which is basically used to repeatedly execute based on given range. So the syntax of for in loop using range is like this. For I in range, then we have three parameters, start and an increment size. Start is optional. So if we give some value, well and good. If we don't give any value, it will take 0 by default. Then this particular parameter end, it is mandatory. You have to give it every time when you are using the range function. Then the increment size is also optional. If we don't give it, it is 1 by default. Okay, let's see the for using range function. So I'll use for I in range. Let's say I'll give 0 start index, then 10, and then increment size as 1. If I'll run it, it will print 0 to 9. So the 10, which is the end parameter, it will go one value less than the end value. So it will print 0 to 9 and it will not print 10. Now I told you that only this part, which is the end parameter, is mandatory. I can omit this 0 and I can omit this 1 also. By default, start will be 0 and increment size will be 1. So it will still print the same output. What if I'll write 10 comma 1? So will it take as start comma end, or will it take as end comma increment size? So by default, it will take this first parameter as start, second parameter as end. So start is greater than end, so it will not print anything here. Let's say if I'll write down 1 and then 10, then it means start is 1, end is 10, and increment size I haven't written here, so it will consider it as 1. So it will print the 1 to 9 values. Now next usage is iterating by the index of sequences. What is index of sequences? So let's take this example. So we have taken a list here. Then I'm using for I in range, and then inside range I am giving len of list. It will calculate the length of the list. Here it will be 3. So it will be equivalent to for I in range 3. It will eventually mean range start will be by default taken as 0, and we have already calculated which is length of list, which is 3, and then increment size is 1, which is a default value, right? This I will contain 0, 1 and 2 value. So we are using in this way so that we can have a control over the iteration number. So that's why I am using in this particular way rather than directly using for loop on the list. So if I want to print the value of list one by one, I'll use list of I and I'll run it. So it is printing A, B and C. If I also want to prefix the index of the list, I'll use I. This way I'm printing the index as well as the element of the list like this. So I'm using iterating by index of sequences so that I can have full control on the iteration number or the index of that particular sequence on which I'm using. So this was the quick video on introduction to loops and for loops.